Welcome back and thanks so much for staying with us. The Life Esidimeni arbitration proceedings kick-started in the new year with all fingers pointing to Dr. Manamela as the main wrongdoer in the Life Esidimeni tragedy. Hannah Jacobus, a Deputy Director of Mental Health in Gauteng, told the arbitration that she was forced by Dr. Manamela to give licenses to NGOs without following proper procedure. Tlantla Jele has more.
You may be seated.
Taking to the stand at the Life Esidimeni arbitration, Deputy Director of Mental Health in Gauteng, Hannah Jacobus, says although she knew what was happening was illegal, there was nothing she could do because she was under the instructions of her then boss, Dr. Manamela.
Dr. Manamela was the final decision maker.
So she, too, was carrying out an instruction?
According to how she explained to us.
Much to the displeasure of retired Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke, Jacobus says Dr. Manamela made the final decisions on which NGOs should be licensed. Jacobus says patients would have survived if finances flowed freely to the NGOs, but this was not the case because Dr. Manamela stopped the procedure.
Two NGO coordinators phoned me and says Dr. Manamela said they should stop that process because of all the other work. It can be done afterwards.
So Dr. Manamela stopped the paperwork so that money can flow to NGOs timelessly. Is that your answer?
That's the process, because if there was paperwork, the money would flow.
The state advocate, Tebogo Hudamo, officially told the arbitration that suspended HOD Dr. Barney Silibano and the former director of mental health in Gauteng, Dr. Magabo Manamela, have resigned. Although family members were not happy with the news, they have expressed that they are happy the two doctors don't hold their positions in the department any longer.
We don't believe resigning actually is taking accountability. So we're happy that they're not in those positions anymore, but resigning for us is not really the answer. We spoke to Thabo Masebe from the Premier's office. He basically said by resigning they keep all the benefits.
The arbitration is set to continue throughout January, with testimonies expected from former Health MEC Qedani Mahlangu, the current Health MEC Dr. Gwen Ramokgopa, the Health Minister Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, and the Gauteng Premier David Makhura. With Ntlantla Jele, ANN7, Johannesburg.
Joining us in studio is Dr. Anthony Townsend, a clinical psychologist. Thank you so much for your time and good evening to you. Of course, we sit now with the Esidimeni arbitration continuing. I'm sure fireworks will be there when former Gauteng Health MEC Qedani Mahlangu gives her evidence. But what has brought us here is essentially the decision from the get-go of not adequately checking whether NGOs were licensed. We've heard now from Hannah Jacobus saying that the former head instructed her to flout processes. This is even more serious than what we had anticipated in what is coming out currently.
Much more serious than we would have hoped would actually be the case in this particular situation, but nonetheless severe in its consequences. Unfortunately, we've seen 140 deaths of patients charged with all sorts of specialized care, unfortunately, and unfortunately we see it's a particularly vulnerable population that was targeted, unfortunately.
And I mean, the health department policy would of course cover all patients in need of medical administration. And in this case, again, there had been warnings, not only from the opposition, but family members have come forward that the level of arrogance that they had experienced every time they were concerned of a missing family member, or that the conditions where they were receiving care were not ideal for a person, you know, that needs special care. So what must the policy, or especially office officials, consider when they're treating a person of special needs?
Well, particularly with populations such as psychiatric populations, we see a certain level of vulnerability in terms of their capacity to take independent care of their own well-being. Because they'll struggle to ultimately to be able to look after themselves, the policy needs to dictate that at all points these people remain humanized. Because unfortunately at large-scale healthcare interventions we can sometimes see a process of dehumanization occur, particularly when it's a stigmatized disorder. So keeping in sight of that humanity that has to be kind of classically looked at in terms of each particular case, as well as the family dynamics, needs to be embedded into policy directives.
Yeah, would you find that even at a family level there is a level of stigma or some level of shame of the member of family, that is differently challenged?
Unfortunately, in our particular context, this still seems to be something that is a factor in terms of trying to help manage the care and well-being of many people. Given that there is stigma in these particular situations, it's important that we're actually starting wider psychoeducation to help people better understand that it's not a choice, it's certainly not something that someone wants to have, but rather it's simply an illness like any other that deserves treatment and care.
And this case, of course, has now put even higher or glaring focus on the need to discuss issues of mental health and how to care for people that are the most vulnerable in society. Where, in your view, has the Department of Gauteng, Health Department, gotten it wrong, that this is a specialized industry or sector of the medical fraternity, and you can't tamper with that?
I think it's precisely the fact of overlooking the specialized nature of care for these particular patients. Given that they struggle with thinking disorders, emotional dysregulation, and even changes to their ability to stay in contact with reality, they cannot be treated as the same way as any other population, medically speaking. And by virtue of not looking into that in their care and placing them into facilities that are ill-equipped, we haven't been able to provide them with the kind of care that they require.
We also joined in studio, Dr. Townsend, by Christina Ngomalo, Life Esidimeni family committee member and a bereaved family member as well. Christina, thanks so much for joining us. This must be a very difficult time for you in reliving the very horrific experience of your loved one. Just give us a brief background in terms of what you and your family has gone through.
It's been a long 2 years, actually, and also just last year, my sister who passed away in the process, his daughter passed away in October.
Sorry to hear.
So unfortunately, this whole process has got what they call ripple effect. It's not just ending with those who passed away. It's actually, reaching into the families as well, because it's really devastating. It hasn't been easy.
And Dr. Townsend, another family also has to face a case where there might even be, or there may not be impunity in the sense, or punitive measures, in the sense that we're seeing the doctors or those that are implicated resigning from their posts, which could extend the prosecution of those particular individuals, so the families receive closure. Is that another burden that the families may have to consider?
I think it may well be, because unfortunately what we find in instances like this, in order for healing to occur, we must see someone take ownership for the actions and the wrongdoings, so that we have something to be able to forgive. Fortunately, in this particular instance, resignation only prevents disciplinary action. It does not preclude any kind of prosecutory action occurring at a criminal level. So it's not the case that just because they resign, we can't necessarily ensure that consequences are imposed on those who have engaged in wrongdoing, so that we can create some level of closure for families.
And Christina, what would that closure be for you? What would be satisfactory?
It's basically what the doctor just said. He really coined it very nicely for us. For somebody to die, and to die in the horrific manner in which they did, it's a crime. It really is a crime. So for us, the resignations really, for us, it's almost it's these officials stepping back, trying to exclude themselves from the process. But we do really, as families, and they've been very clear about this, that they need criminal action taken up against them. For us, that probably would be what we would see as closure, because then it would make sense. Somebody has taken accountability for this.
All right, we're joined on the line by Oba Fumba, the Right to Know campaign coordinator. Oba, thanks so much for your time. The families have already suffered gravely, and now with the arbitration, they have to revisit a lot of the very horrific and painful experiences. Right to Know in assisting those that may not, going forward, have the financial muscle to take civil action against the executive and those that are implicated. How are you assisting the families?
As us as Right to Know, we assist the family to get justice for what is happening to them, and then we feel that the department is responsible to respond in terms of supporting the family of the deceased, and also looking through the contract of the NGO that was agreed upon and how the contract has been agreed without consulting the families, that this is the process that is going to unfold into the relocating the patient under these issues. So that was not been highlighted with the family consultation process and also with the department. So I think that's where our intervention comes in, because the fact that this is a civil society matter, and also civil society have to be holding accountable to the leadership that is their power is tending to.
Yeah. How do you react to the Gauteng province saying that now that Dr. Manamela and Dr. Silebano has resigned, they no longer have responsibility over their action and their conduct, that beyond this, it now depends on other state agencies to deal with prosecution matters?
Okay, the Gauteng province, as our affiliate, as right now, I think they do quite well to go through in terms of the legalities of resignation of these two comrades. And then they're trying to do some analysis to find out if they resign accordingly or they resign because they're trying to run away to the response or to the responsibility of the disease or the accident that had happened. So currently now there's still a caucus around that with the families, and then we look at other strategies of intervening, and also maybe in later we will also submit a court case, whatever, but we're still thinking through what strategy that we can intervene in this so that the families are more heard or are more heard by the public on their side.
All right, Opa Fumba, right to know, joining us on the line. He is the campaign coordinator. Your line is not so great, so we'll just continue here in the studio. Christina, what kind of, when you see MEC, former MEC Kotane Mahlangu, whom everybody seems to have squarely put the blame on her shoulders, what would you want to say to her?
There's just so many things that you want to ask. But for me, I think what really would have helped the situation is when the crisis actually started. It would have been nice for them to actually say, yes, there's a crisis, and actually act. But it's almost as if when the ombudsman was appointed, they literally stopped doing their job. And I think that's probably part of the reason why there were so many people who actually passed away. So for me, it would be, why did they do that? Why did they choose to do that? And why did she choose to lie when she could have just told the truth, so that the issue could be corrected? Even though she didn't want to listen to the experts in the beginning, but when it was happening, she could have done something differently, rather than to go the route that she chose.
Yeah, and Dr. Townsend, why is it also the victim's obligation almost to want to have to find the details and in their own space of trying to heal and manage the situation?
And it's exactly that. It shouldn't necessarily have to be on the onus of the victim, of the person who suffered, to be able to have those answers. Those answers become incredibly important in healing from a traumatic process, to feel that we have a sense of closure and completeness and understanding what our loved one may have gone through. And beyond that, feeling that somebody is actively or even proactively initiating attempts to help that healing process is what marshals it on, not somebody stepping back from us when we need help in that respect.
And should there be a separate criteria in, especially health practitioners, in dealing with people with special needs and vulnerability, to have a little bit more compassion, than able-bodied or conventional patients, as it were?
Most certainly, and that's precisely why we focus on psychiatric care being such a specialized field among nurses, doctors, healthcare professionals, and all members of a multidisciplinary team. It really is something that requires of all of us to reach back into our humanity, to our utmost empathy, to understand that there may be someone who doesn't have a capacity that we get to enjoy, and it's on our own responsibility to be able to help them through it.
Yeah, and Christina, your reaction in hearing some of this, the really shocking evidence that was given by Mr. Jacobison, saying that, on instruction, she was told to literally break the law and to flout their own processes appointing illegal NGOs.
I think we need to go back a little bit. Mental health, generally, is treated like the dumping ground. So what the doctor just described now is the fact that it's specialized has not been treated, that it's actually quite the opposite. Everybody that they don't want to deal with would be thrown into that section of the department. And that really is bad. And I think this is part of why all this is happening, is because you don't have qualified people. But on top of being a special field, if you don't have the heart to look after people, no matter what qualification you have, you're not going to do the right thing when you are in that space. So to hear things like those being said, it just shows you again that that was the attitude going into the whole process, that the heart and the care was not there, because otherwise why would you do something like that if you cared for the people that you are looking after?
And I mean, those people that are appointed, as you say, they're adequately qualified as medical doctors, but just miss that human element, if you will, that extends beyond the clinic nature, of the profession. But could it have been prevented? I mean, it's all in retrospect now. And whether the resignation of these particular doctors is now something that has even complicated matters further, because now you have to pursue them individually as families. How do you, at a paper, the screening, find the heart in a person's application?
I think I would have to leave that to the doctor, but for you to actually, firstly, to be a public servant, you have to have the ethics of wanting to help people. You have to be a principled person, but unfortunately we don't have that, and it's become a norm basically to not treat people with respect and to treat people however you want, because you know. So obviously it cascades in every department. So the health department is not immune to this process. So I don't know how you find it in a CV, but I suppose that's why we have trial periods. We don't do those anymore. Where a person is given 6 months in a specific area and see whether they perform or not perform. But we don't have those things anymore in government anyway, to see whether a person qualifies or has the heart to be in that space.
Yeah. Is there some good, though, that has come out of the arbitration? And I think by the sheer numbers and the great shock that we all, and the outrage that we saw, has now highlighted the need to talk about mental health care, to look at it as not a chronic disease, but something that obviously needs intervention and specialized treatment.
Absolutely, and I think that when we face a traumatic tragedy such as this, we have the root of having post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth requires of us to see that these 143 people who lost their lives in this have served a greater purpose to help people in future, to be able to allow that care is afforded to people so that this does not get repeated, this does not happen, and hopefully open up a wider conversation both in the public and in the medical sector that we need to destigmatize psychiatric conditions to give people the care that they rightly deserve.
And going forward, I mean, you obviously don't want this matter to die, so to speak, to ensure that there isn't a repeat and other families suffer the same loss that you have. Were you moved by some of the deposition, especially with Dr. Silobane, who literally broke down, apologized, saying that he's embarrassed, by what has happened, Christina?
To be honest with you, having been involved in the protest stages before the deaths happened, and having to see this side, for me, I'm not yet moved. And also for the resignation on top of that, I'm not moved. For me, it's almost like I have to do something. For me, I saw a politician. When he was apologizing, I saw a politician doing what he needs to do to survive. And like I said to the Chief Justice, that people are afraid. The instinct is not to tell what really happened because it will implicate them. And that's basically what has happened in the entire process. But also just like you were saying, the good that should come out of this. Yes, the debate is there. People are talking about it. But unfortunately on the ground, the NGOs, the illegal NGOs out there there's so many of them. In December, we had to help the Department of Health close one in Orange Farm. Same kind of scenario, so there's a lot of those still there.
Yeah, but are these part of the 100-odd that were used as to transfer patients to Life Esidimeni, or are these separate cases?
Well, this one in Orange Farm, we're still trying to establish, but the Life Esidimeni had sent patients there, so we're still trying to figure out whether those patients that were sent there fall within that category, but I can't confirm that at this point right now.
And I mean, surely, industries are very rigidly regulated, that this kind of practice should not happen, where even NGOs, is it desperation for money, opportunities? What is it? Or is it family links or, favors for friends? Why do we find this kind of mushrooming of illegal NGOs, Dr. Townsend?
Unfortunately, it can be a combination of the factors already mentioned, as well as the fact that oftentimes, unfortunately, when we give services that are meant to help people, we sometimes fall into the habit of dehumanizing them. They're another entity that's going through the machine, and healthcare is not best treated that way, as large scale as it can be. When we're reminded that we have to understand that these are people's lives, that we are trying to help better at every respect, we usually find you can't proliferate a system like this when you focus on the humanity rather than the profitability or the mechanics of it all.
Yeah. And Christina, I mean, we read news headlines and stories. It's about the statistics. It's very matter of fact, etc. But for you, when you hear details that a loved one has died because of dehydration or very poor living conditions, what does it mean to you?
It just means the worst kind of pain that you can possibly imagine. I mean, to die of thirst. You don't even see that kind of story in a movie. So you can't even begin to imagine, and you feel guilty. You start blaming yourself because you thought you were taking your loved one to somewhere where they will get the care they need, and then this happens. So the first thing that really happens is you blame yourself. You blame yourself because you're thinking, I could have possibly stayed with them, even though you couldn't have. That's why they were sent where they were sent. So it's actually very hard on families. It's hard because you think you did the right thing, only to find out it was probably the worst thing that, that could have happened.
And I mean, if you can't rely on the state or trust that if you were to take a loved one to a reputable institution, and this kind of thing happened, you couldn't have anticipated. So the family is dealing with the guilt and the lack of remorse. I mean, if there were somebody had come in the beginning stages, as you were saying, it would have probably lightened that burden and hurt.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it would have helped a great deal for somebody to be able to say that they are sorry for the tragic consequences and to actively try to make amends rather than shy away from it a lot of the time. And that's going to be important in all of this, is because if we want to heal the current wounds and prevent future ones, we have to make sure that we are putting in systems that actually hold on to the humanity of every patient rather than dismiss it so quickly.
And what would be that expression of remorse that would not satisfy you, but that would be sincere for you to accept?
To be honest with you, I think the fact that the department or that the Premier accepted and they've actually stood up and said, you know what, we accept what has happened. We take responsibility for that. Unfortunately, he cannot speak for all the officials in the individual capacity. But I think that was the one step for us that kind of like showed that we could work together and we can actually move in the same direction. And also the healing sessions, that we've had as families. But just to go back on the services, I think we're very unfair on the NGOs. I'm not a fan of NGOs, but I have to say this. There's a lot of good NGOs. These ones that actually were part of this process were actually created almost as an instant process to quickly absorb these people. And nothing was put in place to actually help them. So it was almost a deliberate attempt to just get rid of people and just close the facility. I don't think they anticipated the deaths, but I don't know how you could not when you don't make funds available to actually look after the people. But also the criteria for the NGOs, that needs to be looked at carefully, because currently you've got people who want to look after patients, but the criteria actually needs them to have the money first to be able to fix things, to be in line with that. And very often the NGOs don't have that. So they will always be illegal, because they cannot beat the department's request or requirements for them to actually be legal. So, and I think that needs to be looked at. As soon as that is looked at, you'll have more facilities and you'll have more legal facilities and people wanting to look after people properly. And I think that needs to be looked at, and I think moving forward, it will help the process.
Yeah, and where people can go as well, Dr. Townsend, if it's not only access of public services, are there organizations that give services pro bono, or what other outlets are there?
There are many outlets actually that can be helpful to people. Lifeline and SADAG are amongst the most prolific of these services. They are pro bono, highly effective, with many skilled, empathic people who are ready to help at any point. So by contacting those via phone or in person, people can start to get the kind of help that they need.
We're going to have to leave it there, but Christina, thank you so much. And my heart really goes out to you and the families, the bereaved families. And as a society, we hope that, justice will prevail and that you'll find the peace and comfort you need.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Christina Ngumalo just sharing her story about the Life Esidimeni. She's a family committee member and a bereaved family member. And we're joined in studio by Dr. Anthony Townsend, who is a clinical psychologist. And you at home, thanks indeed for watching. We'll take a break. We'll see you shortly.